In the previous video, we see Tao opening the chest only to be nearly sliced in half by an energy blade. At the last moment, Lloyd saves her, and the blade tears through the dungeon floor. From beneath the chest, a lich emerges, rising menacingly. The lich stands tall before Tao and Lloyd. After that, Lloyd isn't familiar with the monster, so he turns to Tao for answers. Tao assures him there's nothing to worry about and tries to convince him to leave the cave. However, Lloyd is determined to stay and watch her defeat the monster. Realizing she can't persuade him, Tao suddenly uses her technique to blast Lloyd out of the cave. She hopes the blast will propel him safely to the entrance, silently praying he doesn't break too many bones on the way. As Lloyd is flung through the air, the lich begins its attack. Tao manages to dodge its strikes, but she's unsettled by its presence. Why would a high-level monster like the lich be dwelling in such a low-level cave? She quickly deduces that the lich will be incredibly difficult to handle, so much so that even an A-rank adventurer would struggle against it. Deciding her best course of action is to buy as much time as possible. She focuses on keeping the lich occupied so Lloyd can safely reach the dungeon entrance. Meanwhile, Lloyd is hurtling through the air, propelled by the energy of Tao's blast. Though he's supposed to leave the dungeon, Lloyd refuses to abandon Tao. He uses his barrier spell to slow his momentum and eventually comes to a stop, landing unceremoniously on the dungeon floor. Unfortunately, his landing disrupts two goblins, who scatter in confusion. Puzzled by Tao's decision to send him away, Lloyd consults his grimoire for guidance. At first, there's no response, and Lloyd suspects he's out of range of their magical link. But suddenly, the grimoire's voice cuts through, small and urgent, pleading for Lloyd to return immediately. It begs for his help, leaving Lloyd torn. He doesn't want to abandon Tao, but he doesn't fully understand the situation either. Back in the cave, Tao is barely managing to hold her own against the lich. She tries to retreat slowly, hoping to avoid further provoking the monster. However, the lich notices her use of Kai techniques. It mocks her, claiming that it consumed a previous Kai user and now knows all their secrets. The lich sneers that Kai techniques are nothing more than an inferior form of sorcery. It reveals that by consuming adventurers, it gains their skills and knowledge. However, it declares Tao unworthy of being consumed, as her abilities are beneath its notice. Instead, it becomes interested in Lloyd, whose ability to react quickly to its attacks intrigues it. Tao reflects on Lloyd's unique perspective. Unlike most people, he recognizes the value and potential of Kai techniques. Motivated by his belief in her, she resolves to fight with everything she has. Using her breathing techniques, she launches a powerful attack against the lich, but the monster easily creates a barrier, nullifying her efforts. Undeterred, Tao pushes herself to her limits, sacrificing all her energy to punch a hole through the barrier and unleash a point-blank Kai blast. She collapses to her knees, completely drained, convinced she has defeated the lich. Her relief is short-lived. The lich levitates above her, unscathed. It mocks her for wasting all her energy on what it calls a flimsy barrier. It prepares to cast a spell that it claims surpasses the most powerful energy Tao could ever generate. But as the spell forms, it suddenly disintegrates. The lich is stunned to see Lloyd standing beside Tao, protecting her with a barrier. Lloyd looks at Tao with disappointment, chiding her for giving up so easily. He reassures her that he'll handle the lich. Though he's in a hurry, Lloyd decides to have a little fun with the fight. The lich begins chanting another incantation, but Lloyd moves through the air like a wisp of smoke, appearing behind it without warning. Using a Kai breathing technique, Lloyd combines his mana with Kai, refining his strikes to increase their precision. The lich is baffled. How is a sorcerer like Lloyd using Kai so effectively? Moreover, Lloyd is releasing strike after strike without any incantation. The lich grows desperate, continuously blocking Lloyd's attacks with its magic. But Lloyd grins maniacally, clearly enjoying the battle. He keeps experimenting, sharpening and thinning his strikes until one finally pierces the lich's barrier. The final blow takes the lich down, and a treasure chest appears in its place. Inside, they find only a ragged dagger. Tao dismisses it as worthless, but Lloyd senses residual mana within it and decides to keep it. Suddenly, the chest closes and begins sinking into the ground. Lloyd realizes that the treasure chest is the dungeon's core. It consumes magical items, grows stronger, and creates new dungeons. When adventurers clear the dungeon, the chest releases its collected loot and uses the opportunity to escape. Fascinated by this cycle, Lloyd grabs onto the chest, eager to learn more. However, Tao is more concerned about their safety, urging him to let it go. Lloyd manages to pull the treasure chest from the dungeon floor just as the roof begins to collapse. He and Tao narrowly escape before the dungeon seals itself completely. As they stand outside catching their breath, Tao wonders why Lloyd, a sorcerer, used Kai techniques during the battle. She assumes he did it to avenge her after the Lich mocked her abilities. However, Lloyd casually shrugs it off, explaining that he was just having fun. Suddenly, Lloyd recalls that his grimoire was in trouble. He informs Tao that he needs to leave immediately to address an urgent matter. Tao watches him fly off and resolves to train harder, hoping to become strong enough for Lloyd to find her intriguing one day. Lloyd returns to the castle, entering his bedroom window as usual. He's anxious about the grimoire's condition and finds it lying on the floor, covered in bumps and bruises. The grimoire recounts its ordeal, explaining that Silpha had been furious about Lloyd's apparent weakness during their last training session. She had taken out her frustration on the grimoire, chasing it around and forcing it to endure grueling drills to regain its former strength. The grimoire blames Lloyd for its predicament, accusing him of arriving late. Lloyd apologizes sincerely, promising to make it up to him. The next day, Lloyd and the grimoire are in the castle library, examining the dagger they found in the treasure chest. The grimoire looks unimpressed, questioning if the dagger was worth the trouble. Lloyd insists it's a valuable treasure and decides to investigate further. He soaks the dagger in hot water and scrubs its surface, eventually peeling off a layer of mana essence. The grimoire is intrigued as Lloyd explains that mana essence is a catalyst for enchanting weapons by inscribing spells onto them. Lloyd reads the mana essence's properties and discovers it enhances reinforced strength. The grimoire is excited at the prospect of experimenting with enchantments, but Lloyd cautions that mana essence is expensive and enchantments are prone to failure. To avoid wasting the essence, Lloyd decides to analyze it and attempt to mass produce it. Using a water purification spell, he isolates the essence's raw components: oil, silver, and hematite. The grimoire recognizes hematite as a rare powdered monster core and is amazed at their discovery. Lloyd reveals that the treasure chest they retrieved from the dungeon was its core, meaning they can potentially create more hematite. Both are thrilled, knowing they only need oil, silver, and weapons for their experiments. Lloyd approaches his father, the king, to request a favor. The king hands him a large pouch of silver coins and offers gold instead, but Lloyd insists silver will suffice. The king is impressed by Lloyd's humility and wonders about his plans. Back in the secret library, Lloyd and the grimoire melt the silver coins into liquid form, satisfied with their progress. Later, Lloyd trains with Silpha, determined to improve. He attempts a sprint spell to surprise her, but fails when she dodges effortlessly. Switching tactics, Lloyd uses a morphing spell on the ground, catching Silpha off guard. Just as he's about to claim victory, Silpha vanishes. To his shock, Silpha launches a surprise attack from beneath him, forcing Lloyd to yield. Despite winning, Silpha offers Lloyd a vase of oil as a prize. She admits she's relieved to see he isn't weak and realizes he was just having a bad day during their last sparring session. The grimoire, however, marvels at Silpha's ability to consistently defeat Lloyd, even when he uses magic, and jokingly suggests she might be a monster in disguise. Lloyd takes the oil, promising Silpha he'll put it to good use. Returning to the secret library, he combines the oil, silver, and hematite to successfully create mana essence. The next day, Lloyd visits Prince Albert for assistance in acquiring weapons for his experiments. Albert agrees, enlisting the royal guards to donate their weapons. The guards, skeptical of Lloyd's abilities, dismiss the weapons as expendable, doubting he can succeed. Undeterred, Lloyd activates his replica in auto-assist mode and begins enchanting the swords. The grimoire grows excited as Lloyd engraves spells into the blades. However, Lloyd's overenthusiasm causes one sword to shatter when he tries inscribing too many spells. Learning from his mistake, Lloyd refines his process and successfully enchants 50 weapons out of 120, although 70 swords are destroyed in the process. When Lloyd presents the enchanted swords to Prince Albert, Albert is astounded. Even a master enchanter typically achieves only a 10% success rate, yet Lloyd has enchanted over 40%. The guards remain skeptical until one attempts to sheath his sword, only for it to cut through the scabbard effortlessly. Albert invites Lloyd to join him on a monster hunt to test the weapons in action, and the king grants his permission. Lloyd, Albert, and Silpha set off in a carriage, eager to see the enchanted weapons in battle. Life in the bustling town carries on as usual, with people going about their daily activities. Meanwhile, Prince Albert and Lloyd are traveling in a carriage driven by Silpha. Lloyd, feeling relaxed, is asleep, resting his head on Albert's shoulder. Albert, unbothered, passes the time reading a book. After a while, Lloyd stirs awake, noticing a grimoire resting on his lap. As they pass by a group of farmers, Albert points them out to Lloyd. Lloyd, now fully alert, eagerly observes the townsfolk, fascinated by their everyday lives. His excitement is palpable, as he's not often allowed to roam outside the castle. Soon, the carriage leaves the town's proximity and enters the dense forest, their destination for a monster hunt. Lloyd looks around in awe, taking in the forest's beauty. He wonders aloud whether monsters frequently appear in the area. Silpha explains that monsters don't usually spawn within the forest itself, but gather by a lake beyond it. Lloyd's excitement grows as he realizes he's part of a real expedition, and Silpha notices how thrilled he is. He admits to her that he's looking forward to seeing how enchanted swords perform in battle. Albert observes Silpha's constant attention to Lloyd and teases her, implying that her concern goes beyond that of a mentor for her student. Embarrassed, Silpha quickly draws her sword, forcing Albert to swallow his words. Before the tension escalates, Silpha informs everyone that they have unexpected company. The guards escorting the carriage immediately prepare for an ambush as kobolds armed with steel weapons emerge from the forest. The guards recognize that these creatures are likely just a prelude to stronger monsters. Determined to protect Albert, they step forward to engage the attackers. Lloyd, sitting in the carriage, pretends to be scared of the monsters, but Grimoire quickly sees through his act. Lloyd confesses that he sensed the ambush using spectral detection, a basic but incredibly useful Kai technique that allows him to be constantly aware of his surroundings through Kai breathing. Grimoire is impressed by Lloyd's mastery of detection and barrier techniques, noting that Lloyd uses them almost constantly, which makes him overpowered for his age. As the guards clash with the kobolds, Lloyd watches intently, evaluating the performance of his enchanted swords. The guards easily cut through the monsters, their blades slicing through steel like butter. Even the guards themselves are amazed at how sharp the swords are, handling them with great care to avoid self-inflicted injuries. Lloyd beams with pride, satisfied with the success of his enchantments. Albert praises his younger brother's genius, and Silpha, standing atop a pile of defeated monsters, admits that Lloyd is truly exceptional. However, Lloyd knows she relied entirely on her brute strength to defeat the kobolds, as her weapon wasn't enchanted. Suddenly, a kobold leaps from the shadows, aiming for the carriage. Tao intervenes, striking it down mid-air with precision. Everyone is surprised by her sudden appearance, and she explains that she sensed the presence of monsters nearby and decided to assist. Lloyd, startled, accidentally calls out her name, forgetting that he isn't in his disguised form as Robert. Realizing his mistake, he tries to play it off, but Tao approaches him curiously. She mistakes him for Robert, touching his face to confirm her suspicion. Lloyd freezes as she examines him closely, noting his resemblance to Robert. Before the moment can escalate, another kobold charges at Tao, but Silpha swiftly dispatches it. Silpha then warns Tao not to touch Lloyd so casually. Tao defends herself, explaining that she was fully aware of the monster's approach due to her Kai technique. The tension between the two women grows, and Albert steps in to defuse the situation. He suggests they continue to the lake and use the opportunity to get to know one another better. Later in the day, the group arrives at the lakeside, where they set up camp. Albert thanks Tao for her assistance and introduces himself as the second prince of Saloon. Tao is taken aback and apologizes for her earlier lack of formality. She's also surprised by how different Albert looks compared to Robert, whom she had met before. Meanwhile, Lloyd hides behind a tent, realizing that Tao only detected him earlier because he had been using spectral detection. He decides to stop using the technique, but knows Tao will grow suspicious if he abruptly changes his behavior. To avoid further attention, he stays inside the tent and remains silent. Silpha eventually joins him, asserting that it's her duty to watch over him since the guards are assigned to Albert. Lloyd tries to convince her to leave, but she refuses, citing rumors about a dangerous cat roaming the area. Their awkward moment is interrupted when Tao enters the tent, finding them in what appears to be a compromising position. Silpha immediately goes on the offensive, attacking Tao, who dodges just in time. The two women exchange heated words while Lloyd uses the opportunity to slip away unnoticed. Outside, Lloyd finds the atmosphere more suffocating than the castle despite being outdoors. Albert catches him sneaking away and teases him about being a playboy, pointing out how much Silpha has changed since she started mentoring him. Silpha, still suspicious of Tao's sudden arrival, questions how she managed to find them. Tao explains that she detected the presence of monsters nearby, which led her to their location. However, Silpha remains unconvinced, eyeing Tao warily. Albert, overhearing their conversation, quietly tells Lloyd that Silpha sees him as more than just a prince. She's beginning to regard him as a man. Albert, however, offers Lloyd a serious warning, advising him to tread carefully when it comes to relationships with women. He ominously remarks that things can become very dangerous. As if to prove his point, Silpha and Tao, still in a tense standoff, suddenly shift their attention to a guard who had been watching the exchange. Without warning, the two women lash out, beating the unfortunate guard senseless. Watching this unfold, Lloyd nervously agrees with Albert's earlier statement. Women can indeed be terrifying. Tao breaks the tension by mentioning her current task. She's been assigned to repair a rundown chapel on a hill across the lake. Silpha, unimpressed, tells Tao she can go ahead and complete her work. Albert interjects, cautioning Tao not to go alone, as the area is dangerous. He suggests that she stay with them to help keep watch during the night. Before Tao can respond, a massive bearwolf suddenly emerges from the shadows, silencing any further discussion. The guards immediately assume defensive positions, but they decide to keep their distance and wait for an opening to attack. Silpha steps in front of Lloyd, instructing him to stay behind her. The bearwolf lunges at one of the guards, who narrowly avoids the attack. Lloyd, observing the creature, notes its surprising speed despite its massive size. He turns to Grimoire for insight, but the sentient book seems unusually distracted. Lloyd presses him, and Grimoire admits that the rundown chapel Tao mentioned seems familiar. Before this line of thought can continue, the bearwolf targets another guard. Tao reacts swiftly, using a powerful Kai strike to knock the creature down and save the guard's life. The guard thanks her, but their relief is short-lived. The bearwolf rises again, seemingly unaffected by the attack. Albert, determined to end the threat, draws his enchanted sword. He channels its magic to cast a powerful fireball, which engulfs the bearwolf in flames and reduces it to a crisp. The guards cheer at Albert's prowess, but he humbly credits Lloyd's enchantments on the sword for amplifying his spell. Albert praises his brother's genius, and Lloyd beams with pride, satisfied that his work has proven effective. Grimoire, however, seems uneasy. He recalls that the chapel on the hill was once used to imprison a powerful demon, and Lloyd becomes intrigued by this revelation. Suddenly, the charred bearwolf stirs, rising once more. To everyone's shock, other monsters begin appearing around it. From the bearwolf's mouth emerges Pazuzu, the demon once sealed in the chapel. Furious at the humans for killing his kin, Pazuzu mocks their arrogance and declares they must pay with their lives. He commands the monsters to attack, and they charge at Albert. Albert fights valiantly, but quickly realizes the monsters regenerate every time they are struck. Tao leaps to Albert's aid, noting the monsters' regenerative abilities and the dire situation they're in. Albert admits he's never faced creatures like these before, and observes that some are hybrids, possibly manipulated by the demon. Grimoire explains to Lloyd that the monster's regenerative powers come from Pazuzu infusing them with his mana. He warns that unless the demon is defeated, the battle will never end. Despite the danger, Lloyd's curiosity takes over. He asks Grimoire to teach him how to transmute mana. Grimoire, initially reluctant, tries to dissuade Lloyd, emphasizing that mastering such a technique takes years. However, Lloyd persists, forcing Grimoire to begin the lesson even as chaos ensues around them. Meanwhile, Silpha mocks Tao for struggling against the monsters, but Tao snaps back, accusing Silpha of doing nothing to help. Their argument is interrupted when Pazuzu taunts Lloyd, calling him weak and mocking Silpha for babysitting him. The insult infuriates Silpha, who demands permission to confront Pazuzu directly. Silpha approaches the demon, who tries to intimidate her by boasting about his regenerative abilities. Silpha remains unfazed, retorting that he's polluting the air and needs to be eliminated. Pazuzu, enraged by her defiance, attacks, but Silpha expertly dismembers the monster housing the demon. The demon begins regenerating, but Albert notices that the other monsters are regenerating more slowly. Realizing Pazuzu is focusing his mana on healing himself, Albert devises a plan. Silpha should deal as much damage to the demon as possible to weaken him, giving the others a chance to destroy the remaining monsters. Lloyd continues his mana transmutation lesson, quickly mastering the technique by creating a mana-infused flower. Grimoire is astonished by Lloyd's rapid progress. Silpha borrows an enchanted sword from a guard and skillfully uses it to overpower Pazuzu. The demon, shocked by her strength, shifts his focus to Lloyd, believing him to be a weak link. However, Silpha intercepts and uses a secret Langus technique to tear Pazuzu apart. As the demon falls from his housing monster, Silpha declares that he'll never harm Lloyd, as the only thing he'll ever get close to is her blade. Silpha confronts Pazuzu, urging him to surrender, claiming she's already subdued him. However, Pazuzu merely laughs at her boldness. Suddenly, he begins spewing poisonous mana from his mouth, enveloping the area in a thick, toxic fog that blinds Silpha. Meanwhile, the knights successfully defeat the monsters and celebrate their victory. But Albert quickly reminds them that the creatures will regenerate unless Pazuzu is defeated. As the poisonous mana spreads, the knights are overwhelmed and lose consciousness. Silpha struggles to fight off the effects but collapses to her knees in front of Pazuzu. Despite her condition, Pazuzu grows enraged upon realizing that the monsters he spent a century raising since breaking free from the church's seal have been defeated. He launches a powerful attack that sends Silpha flying into a nearby tree. Albert watches helplessly, unable to move, clawing at the ground in frustration. Pazuzu mockingly explains that anyone who inhales his mana of domination becomes paralyzed under his control. Silpha finally understands why the air smelled so foul, but her attempt at sarcasm enrages Pazuzu, prompting him to strike again. Just then, Tao arrives, blocking the attack and positioning herself between Pazuzu and Silpha. Tao checks if Silpha can stand, but Silpha, trembling and trying to appear tough, insists she doesn't need help. However, her facade breaks as she begs Tao to flee with Lloyd while she holds Pazuzu back. Moved by Silpha's courage, Tao refuses to abandon her. Despite Tao's immense skill, Pazuzu notices something unusual. His mana doesn't seem to affect her. As she fights back fiercely, he realizes that her unique breathing technique is shielding her from his control. Enraged, he taunts her, but Tao counters with a massive electrified attack. The move momentarily stuns Pazuzu but drains Tao, leaving her vulnerable as the monsters regenerate and surround her. Pazuzu mockingly compares himself to Tao's haughty, deriding her choice and boasting about his kin's regenerative power. Frustrated, Tao lashes out, declaring she'd never align with something as grotesque as him. Inspired by the thought of her hottie coming to her aid, she refuses to give up. Pazuzu, losing interest in Tao, turns his attention back to Silpha. He plans to corrupt her completely and make her his eternal servant, just as he did with the bear wolves. He reveals to Lloyd how he manipulated the wolves into believing he was their parent after killing their real ones. Hearing this, Lloyd is both shocked and determined to act. To everyone's surprise, Lloyd walks through the poisonous mana unscathed. Pazuzu is stunned and demands an explanation, but Lloyd admits he doesn't know why the mana doesn't affect him. Grimoire, standing protectively beside Lloyd, catches Pazuzu's attention. The demon jeers at Grimoire's appearance, calling him a disgrace to demon kind. Grimoire, unfazed, decides to let Pazuzu learn his lesson the hard way. When Pazuzu sends his monsters to attack, Lloyd sees an opportunity to test mana transformation. Despite his inexperience, he channels a peaceful and calming energy, astonishingly taking control of the bear wolves. Under Lloyd's command, the wolves turn against Pazuzu. forcing him to fight his own creations. Furious, Pazuzu retaliates by unleashing his full power. However, Lloyd, eager to push his abilities further, counters with a barrage of spells that leave the demon reeling. Grimoire observes that Pazuzu now understands why his mana doesn't work on Lloyd. His flawless mana control leaves no gaps to exploit. Realizing he's outmatched, Pazuzu panics. He attempts to flee, understanding too late that Lloyd's goal wasn't to defeat him but to trap him. As Lloyd prepares to cast a barrier, Pazuzu narrowly escapes, vowing revenge while lamenting his humiliating defeat. Pazuzu continues flying, desperately dodging the barriers cast by Lloyd. He pleads with Lloyd to stop trying to capture him. Exhausted, Pazuzu takes cover behind a rock to catch his breath, but Lloyd quickly casts another barrier, narrowly missing him. Grimoire, observing from the sidelines, wonders how many barriers Lloyd can summon at once. Lloyd nonchalantly informs him that he can maintain up to 10 barriers simultaneously, including some on standby. He even offers to increase the number if Grimoire joins him. Meanwhile, Pazuzu frantically evades the barriers, his frustration mounting. He flies around, searching for an opening to escape, but the relentless pursuit leaves him bewildered. He marvels at Lloyd's ability to cast so many spells at once, his ego momentarily overriding his survival instincts. As he mentally congratulates himself for dodging the barriers, Lloyd traps him in a dimensional enclosure. Panicked, Pazuzu struggles to break free, fearing Lloyd's intentions for experimentation. Lloyd coldly reminds him that his magic won't work against him and reveals that he deduced Pazuzu's cruel experiments on the bear-wolves, mixing them with other monsters. This revelation angers Lloyd, who condemns Pazuzu for his atrocities. Activating a serial spell-casting technique, Lloyd begins unleashing a barrage of powerful magic. Desperate, Pazuzu attempts to bargain, offering Lloyd anything he desires once he rules the world. He even confesses that he's never faced magic as powerful as Lloyd's and may not survive. Unfazed, Lloyd combines the 4 natural elements into a high-level magic spell, casting it 3 times faster than normal through rapid activation. Pazuzu begs for mercy, suggesting they negotiate, but Lloyd ignores him, enthralled by the beauty of the spell's combination. Releasing the spell within the barrier, Lloyd observes with fascination as he maintains a casting rate of 240 spells per minute. He decides to keep the spell active for 30 minutes. After some time, he calls out to Pazuzu, receiving no response. Fearing he may have killed him, Lloyd feels a pang of disappointment that Pazuzu couldn't withstand his magic for even 5 minutes. Grimoire remarks that while demons possess high resistance to magic, they aren't entirely immune, and prolonged exposure to such a barrage can overwhelm them. As Pazuzu withers away, he laments the collapse of his legacy, built over centuries of preparation. Locking eyes with Lloyd one last time, Pazuzu resigns himself to his fate. Grimoire taunts him, noting it's more enjoyable to follow someone who embraces life rather than wallow in suffering. Pazuzu entrusts his ambitions to Grimoire before fading away. Grimoire absorbs Pazuzu's remnants, regaining some of his power and becoming excited at the prospect of a future rematch with Lloyd. Meanwhile, Lloyd re-enters the group, fabricating a story that Robert defeated the demon. Tao searches desperately for Robert, eager to catch a glimpse of him. Back at the castle, the king commends Albert for defeating the demon and its minions, but chastises him for undertaking such a dangerous expedition with only his guards. Albert apologizes for his oversight and updates the king on the adventurers who assisted him. He explains that Robert disappeared before anyone regained consciousness, and Tao left in search of her true love. Intrigued by Robert's abilities, the king listens as Albert praises Lloyd's contributions, emphasizing that his weapons and strategies were vital to their success. Albert suggests allowing Lloyd to contest for the throne, arguing that his qualities are befitting of a king. The king warns that this would increase competition, but Albert insists he would relinquish the throne for someone better suited to lead the kingdom. When asked if he wishes to vie for the throne, Lloyd emotionlessly declines, much to the king's admiration, who interprets this as humility. Outside, Lloyd plays with a bear-wolf that followed them home, now named Shiro, while the others return to the forest. Grimoire, feeling jealous of Shiro, fluffs himself up to get Lloyd's attention. He reassures Lloyd that the bear-wolves won't cause trouble now that his magic is settled. Silpha arrives unexpectedly, prompting Lloyd to hide Grimoire in Shiro's fur. He introduces her to Shiro, but admits he doesn't know how to train him. Silpha suggests using magic to instruct monsters, which excites Lloyd. Grimoire realizes that Lloyd's true passion lies in magic, not power or prestige. The king, observing from afar, comments on Lloyd's modesty, but Albert suggests that Lloyd's destiny likely lies beyond their small kingdom. Enthralled by Lloyd's potential, the king eagerly anticipates what he will achieve in the future.